Welcome back F11 members to part 2 of the fundamentals of post-production video tutorials for issue 47, December 2015. In part 1 we worked on a foggy or misty image, and in part 2 I'd like to do what we did in part 1, process a picture using just Lightroom without recourse to Photoshop. And let's face it, 90% of the time that's a perfectly feasible thing to do. The image I'd like to work on is this one here, and if I now go to the develop module, it's a beautiful autumn day down at Tar Steps and the colours are fabulous. And of course it was shot, I think, round about 11 AM in the morning, and so the sun's quite high. It's quite a high contrast picture, not normally the kind of light that I would be working with, but then again, that's autumn for you. The sun is never that high in the sky, so it's feasible to do pictures late in the morning or early in the afternoon. And if I look at this picture now, the end result, yes, there are a few highlights burning out here in the brightest part of the image. But really, should I be losing sleep over that? I don't think so. The overall, within the context of the overall picture, that's really quite acceptable. If I now come down here and click on this compare button, you'll see the before and after. On the left, the picture, the unprocessed raw, and the one on the right. Quite an improvement, I think you'll agree. So let's work through what I did to get there. Okay, go back to Loop View and I'll just clear up my workspace here so I can see the image. And now if I just reset this image, so we go back to the starting point. And the very first thing I'm going to do is something that we've not really dealt with much in previous video tutorials. It's this concept of camera calibration, and I did talk about it in one a few months back and said that virtually all the time I keep my profile set to Adobe standard. I find it quite a nice balanced profile to be working in. But I have noticed with my Canon 5D SR that the Adobe standard camera calibration does tend to crunch the blacks a bit. So I'm going to, in this particular case, before I do anything else, I'm going to choose Camera Faithful. And there's not much of a difference, but I am just seeing a little bit more of those, a slightly less contrasty image. So most of the time I wouldn't do this, but when I'm dealing with this really high contrast situation, I think it's worth doing. Now, I used a little stopper filter on this shot to get a bit of movement there in the water. If you look at my details here, it enabled me to give a 30-second exposure. That's using a polarizing filter as well to really saturate the colors. But of course, my little stopper filter, as I'm sure yours does too if you have one, gives a color cast. And you'll remember in a previous video tutorial we worked through the process of calculating what color correction to give, or how to calculate what color correction you need to give for your individual filter. I've done my tests and I know that to neutralize the effect of my little stopper filter I need to give an extra 2400 Kelvin. So I'm going to do that now. 5100 plus 2400 is 5500. So if I put that in, and now I add a touch of tint, I need to add +7 of tint, that will neutralize the effect of my little stopper filter. And you can see it warms up the image considerably, giving a much more warm autumnal feel. So that's great. That's a really useful test to be able to do. and now I know I've got a neutral image there. So let's work on from there and look. My first port of call is to look, as always, at the blacks and the whites. And in this particular case, because we have quite a high contrast situation, there is no scope for moving the black and white points in. If I do so, I'll very quickly lose shadow and highlight information. Just to illustrate that, if I hold down Alt and move the whites to my right, I can see immediately I'm clipping, or those highlights are clipping. The same with the blacks. I can't go very far at all. In fact, I can go a little way to the left, but I'm not going to because I want to keep all of that detail there as I possibly can in the darkest parts under the bridge there. What I am going to do now is use my highlight recovery slider to try and pull back as many of those tortured highlights as I can, and I'm going to be quite extreme with this and come all the way back to -90. Now that's flattened the image quite considerably, and at the same time I'm going to boost the shadows so I can see more down here. This is really leaning on the dynamic range of the camera quite heavily. We're really trying to get out what we possibly can from the picture there. And it's already made quite a difference to the shot. Let's just come down here and see where we've got with it. There you can see on the left and the right the difference so far. Okay, let's just carry on with our work here. I'm just going to add a bit of vibrance to give the colours a bit of punch, but being careful not to go too far because we all know the dangers of that. Nevertheless, this is a very colourful image and we want those autumnal colours to really be at their best. So I've given vibrance of +17 there. If I ever go over +20 on my vibrance, I know something is radically wrong. Next thing I'm going to do is use the good old grad tool. Such a useful tool, and I'm just going to lay it along the line of the bridge here. Okay, quite a narrow grad there, squash it down quite significantly, and I'm just going to darken down the touch of the image, the top of the image a touch. Not much, but just a bit. Around about 20 there, and I'm going to just put a slight dash of contrast in, not much, just 6. Click on Done, and now I'm going to look at the bottom left of the corner of the image here. These reflections off the water there. I'm going to use the grad tool again, bringing it in from the bottom in this particular case, to just darken down that corner of the image there. And now if I come back on my exposure there, quite heavily actually, round to about 70-ish, and dial in quite a bit of contrast as well. It really tends to hold in the picture in that bottom left-hand corner of the frame. Click on Done and consider where I've got with this picture. I've yet to sharpen it, so as always I'm going to click on Sharpen Scenic. Normally I would apply masking, but in this case the image is actually full of fine detail, so I want to sharpen everywhere. So there's no need to use the masking tool in this particular instance. And that's it. That is the picture. And now if I look at it and compare it to where we started, you can see what we have done. Let's just recap here. We set camera calibration to faithful to really try and preserve some of that shadow detail. I altered the colour balance of the image because I'd used a little stopper filter. I then used highlight recovery to try and recover as many of the highlights here in the brighter part of the image. And if you look up here where the leaves are in the top of the frame, just look at the difference between left and right. It really is quite incredible what we can pull back from both the highlights and the shadows. I then used the shadow recovery to do the same, to recover as much shadow information as I could in the darker recesses under the bridge. I used a grad tool to darken down the top of the frame and another grad to darken down the bottom left-hand corner of the image, and then sharpened. Oh, and I added just a touch of vibrance. And that's it. And it just shows what a flexible program Lightroom is and how often you can do everything you need to without ever going into Photoshop. So that's it for this month. We'll be back with more fundamentals of post-production video tutorials for you next month. And as always, do feel free to send in suggestions of what you would like to see covered. And as always, it's not just about how we do post-production, it's why we do it, and those crucial decisions to really tease out the best in an image. See you next month. Bye.